on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. You know who it is by now.
Jimothy.
So ladies and gents, we are back after what has been quite a exciting end to YCS Lille. I did actually do this video probably was it yesterday or the day before, but because I was watching the YCS, I decided to re-record it just because I wanted to just talk about the YCS briefly. What a way to end the YCS. Having the nib token crash into like the Terror Incarnate was just like absolutely classic eval. It was actually quite funny to see. Like, I don't think the opponent kind of like realized that Nightmare Pain forced you to do that, which was crazy. But it just goes to show, ladies and gents, and this is the reason why I'm making today's video. Like, there's so many things coming up in the meta game, which means that the way that the game is played is going to change slightly, and the reason I'm saying that is because I feel like we're going to have a little bit more of a shift to some mid-range strategies, mainly because of the card in question, which are Mulcharmy Fuwalos and Mulcharmy Fuwalos. Now these cards are just like they're so polarizing in the community. In one sense, it's a good thing because it stops players like overextending, but in the other sense, it can lead to some really weird game states where you're kind of like forced to play really suboptimally. It is quote unquote the maxi substitution, but it just, I don't know, it's really weird how the card works, and I can't pinpoint whether or not it's balanced or not. I don't know. I feel like Fuwaross just goes that little bit further. So without wasting any more time, ladies and gents, let's get into today's video. Okay, so Mulcharmy Fuwalos, let's read this card verbatim. This card reads: if you control no cards, quick effect, you can discard this card and apply these effects this turn. Each time your opponent special summons a monster from the deck or extra deck, immediately draw one card. Once during the end phase, if the number of cards in your hand is more than the number of cards in your opponent's controls +6, you must randomly shuffle cards from your hand into the deck so the number in your hand equals the number your opponent controls +6. You can only activate one other Mulcharmy monster effect the turn you activate this effect. So effectively, this is maxi, ladies and gents. And I was watching a YCS and I think it was like Yassine that resolved this. I managed to like draw into like 2 or 3 or 4 hand traps, and it still wasn't enough to obviously stun his opponent. But I do think with Fuwaross, it's a little bit more, well, it's a little bit nerfed in comparison to Fuwaross, because a lot of the plays that the opponents were doing were just kind of trying to play around Fuwaross by special summoning from the deck, and obviously the extra deck just had no limits on it, so you could literally just do what you want. But I do feel like this card is gonna effectively force more of a mid-range meta just because of its existence. Ash has never been more important, believe it or not. Just being able to kind of like stop this card from resolving is going to be huge, which means that Ash is going to be like a staple in decks, which I think is a little bit of a bad thing, which I'll talk about in a moment, ladies and gents. But I do think like that the Mulcharmy cards are definitely going to polarize how deck building is, and it's going to kind of like just force you to include some cards to counteract it, because it's just so the pendulum swing in advantage is just so phenomenal. It's crazy. So you are going to see a few cards, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, ladies and gents. A few cards that can help counter this meta threat. So let's get into them. Now, fortunately, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game with over like 12,000 cards, so obviously there are going to be some counters. Now, some counters are better than others, but the fact that this is a hand trap means you've got less time to react to it and less time to kind of like set yourself up and insulate yourself from what could potentially be coming in the form of more hand traps. So bearing that in mind, ladies and gents, there's a few counters to this card. The most obvious one being Ash Blossom. It draws cards. Ash is just a mainstay staple, and I think when people start doing their tier lists for hand traps and all that kind of stuff, Ash is going to be at the top just because of its dual purpose in stopping Fuwaross, and just being able to affect just more or less every deck in the metagame. It's never really good by itself, as has been mentioned previously, but in this instance with Fuwaross coming out, even though it's going to be like £149 or whatever it's been touted on as pre-sale, people are going to buy this card, people are going to have it, and it's going to be effective nonetheless. So Ash Blossom is definitely a card. Another card potentially is Crossout Designator. Now the reason I say this is because typically people are not going to play Fuwaross in their main deck unless you're coming up against some kind of weird going second strategy that isn't Tempai. So more times than not, you're going to be seeing this games 2, potentially games 3, depending on where you at. And I do feel like Crossout Designator is one way to counteract it. It does mean that you need to own a copy of the card yourself, which is a little bit unfortunate because, like I said previously, price is a little bit exorbitant, but it is what it is. It's still a counter, it's still there, so if you can afford it, definitely do it. Another card that comes to mind is Triple Tactics Thrust. The reason I say this is because Thrust typically can allow you to not necessarily play through, but set up some kind of like win condition or some kind of floodgate basically, which allow you to survive with a minimalistic board, whether that be like D barrier for example, or setting some card like, I don't know, different dimension ground, something along those lines, which will floodgate your opponent for a turn, enable you to kind of like clap back, because typically they're going to put monsters on their field, which means that the other Fuwarosses that the draw run to are going to be dead. So I do think Thrust is going to see a lot more play, especially with some of the busted trap cards that we've got in the game at the moment, especially ones that linger, that are not continuous, like things that you can flip in response to your opponent's cards, like, I don't know, like I said previously, D barrier for example. Those are going to see a lot more uptick just because of the nature of Thrust and just the nature of the game. Some other cards that potentially you might want to include, ladies and gents, Pour by the Grave. This goes without saying, you may need it. It's a little bit unfortunate if your opponent has 2 Fuwaross in hand, because they could just chain them to each other, which is a little bit annoying, just because they just get maximum value. Like drawing twice for one summon is ridiculous, but it is what it is. Another card that you could potentially include is Small World. This is just a bridge into some kind of monster floodgate. I don't know, it could be like, you know, Spell Canceller for example. Just being able to search something to kind of like combat your opponent. Obviously it requires a little bit of deck building, and this is one of the positive upticks I feel about this card. It's going to force players to think differently, and I do think Small World is definitely a way to kind of like play around Fuwaross in a bit more of a unique way by searching some kind of like monster that can be oppressive. I don't know, Thunder King Raiho for example. That's just a card that just comes to mind basically. And obviously Dimension Shifter. Now this isn't a direct counter, ladies and gents. This is more of a, if your deck can't utilize the advantage that the Fuwaross provides, then it just nullifies it basically. So if your opponent chains Fuwaross but they're not able to play next turn because of Dimension Shifter, then so be it. It's life, it is what it is. So it's definitely a good card. Obviously not every deck can play it, but that's why I do feel like decks like Ritual Beast for example, I've seen a little bit more of an uptick just because of the existence of Shifter, and it's always been that way, which is a little bit unfortunate because decks tend to get relegated to quote-unquote shifter decks, which, yeah, it is what it is. But that's just my thoughts on a few techs, ladies and gents. Now, the thing that I don't like about Mulcharmy Fuwalos is that it's gonna force you to play a suite of cards. Now, a little bit similar to like Master Duel and even the OCG in some instances, is you're going to include 3 Ash, you're going to include a Call by the Grave, and you're potentially going to include a Crossout Designator in your deck. So that's already 6, 7, 8, 9 slots that are dedicated to defensive cards just to combat Fuwaross, which can be a little bit frustrating. If you just decide not to play any of those and you just go like balls to the wall, quote unquote, for want of a better term, you're just putting yourself at a great disadvantage because you don't know what your opponent's drawing into. They could just draw into board breakers, they could draw into the one piece of kryptonite that just cripples your deck. It's unbelievable the potential that this card has, and it's definitely going to skew deck building, and that's why I'm saying that you're going to see a lot more of the mid-range decks, just because they'll be able to set a bit of back row, they'll be able to set some interaction that's not in the form of a monster, or they'll just stop summoning altogether and just set their cards and just kind of like nullify the effect of Fuwaross, and it just means your opponent's gone neg. And not every strategy can do that, but you're going to tend to see people playing strategies that will do that because of Mulcharmy Fuwalos, which is interesting. And the funniest thing is, I was looking to play Unchained this format, and Unchained just directly plays into Fuwaross, but we'll see anyway, ladies and gents. We will see. But that's it. That's the end of the video, ladies and gents. Tell me what you think. Do you think Fuwaross is going to be polarizing to the community? Do you think it's going to change the metagame as it was, as it is basically? Let me know in that comment section below. And also, if there are any cards that you feel like could help combat the Fuwaross, definitely let me know in that comment section below. And if you did enjoy this content, you know what to do by now. Hit that like button, share, subscribe, all of that beautiful good stuff, and I will definitely see you guys on the next video. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.